So one of the things that I'd like to do is hear from you what you take away and some of the points that you find really important for next steps and how this session has helped you think about directions for water management in the U.S.
I'm Abali Hawk. I work for Mass Department of Environmental Protection. I actually have a quick question to both Wayne and Barbara. I see an exciting possibility. Do you think there is some way the soil moisture sensor, that concept, and the Duck Unlimited can be combined to hold soil moisture down so the arid areas are not becoming more arid? Like local example is Mass Audubon Drumlin Farm, where I visit frequently. I see they do like crop rotation or organic farming. They proactively try to hold soil moisture down. So that can also help climate change. It's my understanding from going to UNH Extension School last year to see one of the presentations of Dr. Barry Rock.
Yes, so there are a lot of potentials there, and you're right, there is that relationship with the moisture content. I mean, for the techniques, the conservation practices for helping retain the soil moisture are some of those same practices that help retain carbon and reduce that mineralization of carbon to CO2 into the atmosphere. And so there is a whole lot of research that's already been conducted in this area. I think a lot of these practices are well known. And what we really need to focus on in many respects is increasing adoption. And that's one of the reasons why we are so emphasizing that so heavily in our National Soil Health Campaign and NRCS and working with partners to do that. Because we see that building the organic matter, whether it's a residue mat or whether it's just increasing the carbon in the soil, it increases the available water holding capacity in the soil. But there are sometimes that can take several years to achieve that higher level of water holding capacity in the soil. But you can have immediate effects just by having residue on the surface. For example, think of snow blowing across a field. Now if you have residue that can trap that snow so that it sits there in place, so that it melts, so that it infiltrates into the soil. Think of water just running across the field. Now if you have residue on the surface, that it's going to slow down that flow of water so that water has more of a chance for infiltrating into the soil. And so all of these are these types of practices that we are advocating and promoting and providing financial incentives for are for doing just that.
And just to add, I think there's really interesting possibilities for how you put the two together, where the kind of data that we're now starting to move towards of having all this information coming off the machines, coming off of sensors, telling us what's really going on, perhaps providing more validation for some of these, what happens to the farmers that actually adopt these practices. We can measure it and show that, hopefully show that there's financial reasons that you would want to do this. And if you're tracking that over a number of years, and I recognize that there's been experiments that show this, but there is nothing like on-the-ground experience at the larger scale with actual farmers to validate and build acceptance. So I think there's interesting possibilities to maybe put those two together.
I'm going to follow up with a moderator question with that. So I know, Wayne, you said that you'd reached about 6,000 farmers by, that half-day conference and the webinars. What were some of the things that came out as challenges for implementation? What else is needed? The extension educator and the land-grant universities play a unique role in some of this rollout, transferring this research and helping implement. Do you have suggestions on those two?
Yeah, some of the data is still being compiled now. Dr. Rob Myers and I are kind of co-leading that effort. He's with the University of Missouri, and there's a lot of data. And so he has an employee that's working to compile that right now, so I can't answer your question completely. But some of the things that are surfacing is questions on cover crops, particularly with seeding rates, questions, and what farmers are most heavily focused on is making sure that that does not potentially negatively impact their main crop that they're relying on for their income. And so they're worried about like getting the cover crop off the field in time, or what if in the more semi-arid region, what's the right seeding rate, the right time to terminate the cover crop so it doesn't take up too much moisture in that already moisture limited season. And so there are those types of questions that are really kind of basic questions that we think that we'll be able to provide answers to, not only from some of the work that's already been done, but from some of the work that we're starting to really focus on now.
And then from John Deere's side, I mean, obviously they're investing in equipment and data, and they must see potential. Have you had any of those discussions with them?
They do definitely see a lot of potential for where all this is going. The group that we're working with is the research arm. And if you've ever worked with companies and you've worked with the research versus the operational side, sometimes there's gaps between the two. And the vision of the researchers may not necessarily align with what the main line of the company is saying. And so that's where some of those battles were playing out. And it remains to be seen where that's going to go, but clearly the possibilities are there, and if John Deere doesn't do it, somebody else will.
Other questions?
Hi, I'm Linda Hudgens. I think I have a question and a comment. I'm a hydrologist. I work for the Mass Department of Conservation and Recreation, and I'm a staff member to the State Water Resources Commission. So my first question, one of the things we do is monitor drought conditions in Massachusetts. And I had no idea there was a soil moisture monitoring network. I suppose I can go on the website and see where that's involved. But could you comment on who or where these monitoring sites are and who's sponsoring them or running them?
Okay. USDA, who is actually running some of these things.
I know nothing, so anything you say is going to be a good answer.
Yeah, so there are some sites and some publicly available data. NASA is actually putting up the satellites, and there's a soil moisture, I think the SMAP stands for active passive system, that's going to be coming online very soon. There's early adopters, and they've been having sort of this pretend data coming in that people are working with on-the-ground soil moisture sensors. And you can become an early adopter and start trying to work with some of this data. The challenge with working with remote sensing data is it takes a lot of investment just to figure out how to use it. It's not a user-friendly process. So it's one of the reasons why we never worked with it in our work, because we didn't have the expertise and didn't feel like spending the time to gain the expertise. Now my student's a postdoc at the lab, and he's getting immersed in it. So he's learning about that. So there's a need to take these different data sources of the actual soil moisture on the ground, the sensors from the sky. Now we're going to have information coming off machines, very different scales, and actually aggregate them and say, here's our best estimate of what soil moisture is based on these different sources. And we've got technology that we can do that. We can create data services that would provide that and some error bounds. But we just need to do it, to put it together. And it's another research project to bring in these different facets. So I'm not going to promise you it's going to be easy when you try to do this.
Right, I guess another comment is we've been working, the state is a cooperator with the U.S. Geological Survey, I'm sure in many states in the United States, but in Massachusetts. And we've been somewhat expanding our network of, the USGS typically does groundwater level monitoring long-term and streamflow monitoring. We've been recently working with them and our local National Weather Service office to install some more weather gauges where we need additional information for things like flood forecasting and drought monitoring and things like that. So maybe that's another opportunity to get the soil moisture involved. We had started down the exploration of what would it take. I don't think we were thinking about automated soil moisture, but maybe going around and doing some manual measurements. So maybe that's something we could talk about if there's a better way to do that. We don't have a lot of money, but we have people all over the state already doing some hydrologic monitoring, so maybe that's an opportunity.
Soil moisture sensors are pretty inexpensive, and it's not that hard to hook them up, but there is a technology barrier where it is some effort. You do have to maintain them, go out there in the field, and not everybody wants to do that. We were trying to convince Deere they should stick sensors on the machines for soil moisture, and we haven't gotten that culture win over yet because different group of people running that than the ones that want the soil moisture data. So
right, but it
we'll see
seems
how
like
that plays
we've
out.
got the hydrologic technicians running all over the state. Maybe it's a really good way to do that. And
We do. And the
expeditiously.
better ways are out there. We just haven't put the pieces together
Right.
to put it into an operational system.
right, so maybe a grant for that.
Yeah, there's
the
a
other-
lot of need.
I guess the comment I was thinking of is, what's kind of going through my mind is we do a lot of work with water suppliers in Massachusetts, and the state is just finishing up a sustainable water management initiative, and kind of one of the outcomes of that is a change to our Water Management Act permitting regulations, where large water users have to report, and they're permitted by the state DEP. And through that process, we're going to be asking water suppliers, public water suppliers in particular, to mitigate the impacts of increasing water use via forecasts for the next 20 years. And some of these farming practices sound like they could really fit in with our concepts of trying to keep the water infiltrating in normalized stream flows and enhance base flows in the summer months. So I'm wondering if maybe some of these agriculture practices could almost be, traded like you were talking about in the, the grasslands areas, that there's maybe some benefit that, we could work together with that as our best management practices or mitigation measures. So interesting ideas.
I guess I'd just like to comment on that. I think there's tremendous opportunities there. And aside even from kind of the resiliency issues and the water quantity issues or the water quality issues, just this last year we put together a team to help us beef up our edge of field water quality monitoring practice standards. And that's something that very much that we rely on partners, because we're not a monitoring agency, but we rely on our partners to do it with us. And this is like at the edge of field, so that we can quantify the impacts and hopefully the benefits of our conservation practices on what's running off of that field. Because as we all know, if you try to measure what's in the stream and then infer what's going on a given farmer's field, there's lag effects, there's other land use impacts within the watershed that all influencing that in-stream measurement. But by having this type of data that's coming right off the farmer's field, then that would allow us to partner with USGS and others to help understand those relationships. For example, how long it would take for those improvements in the field, how much land area in that watershed, conservation practice implementation, how much of that is needed in order for that to show up in that stream water quality.
Can I add one thing on it?
Yeah.
So I have another project working in Texas where we're looking at droughts and partnering with the Texas Council on Environmental Quality. And in Texas, they have a water master system in some of their watersheds where everybody's permitted for the water that they take. And during a drought, they have to call in every day and say, here's how much water I want to use. And they track the USGS stream flow gauges to basically make a decision by the seat of the pants to say, yes, you can, or no, you can't. And who do they need to cut off, and who don't they, and by how much? And they don't use any models or anything to try and do that at the moment. So we're trying to bring in some models that will give them some tools and bring in the real-time data so that when they make those decisions, they can see what the impacts might be going out a couple of weeks which requires linking together the weather forecasting, the runoff forecasting, and the stream flow forecasting. This is just for stream flow. And then I have another student who's looking at what might the implications for that be if they actually had a real-time water trading market like an eBay. The hard part is putting all the pieces of the water cycle together, because there are small landowners that are not permitted who are allowed to take as much water as they want. There are energy users who are taking massive amounts of of water, but actually putting some back, but we don't know how much they're putting back. So how do we close that water balance? There's a lot of data holes when you try and do this, but very fascinating possibilities for where it could go in terms of better water management.